Hey there, it's Leslie at Leslie's Cookies and Treats, and today I'm jazzing up a Far Out Santa cookie. He's one of 6 different Santa designs made with the same cookie cutter. But before we get started, do you want to create the cutest Christmas cookies that Santa's ever seen, or make a beautiful Christmas Village cookie set that you can serve at your holiday dinner? Well, join my online cookie decorating classes and following step-by-step video tutorials. You'll find out everything you need to know to make cute cookies just like these and have an unforgettable Christmas dessert that's perfect for sharing or for gifting. Get more details in the description. I hope you'll check out the cookie classes, but until then, let's get back to this cute disco Santa. So I want to use my icing here to make a line in his hat where the fold will be, and then I'm also just going to put a little line of thick icing here because I want this area to be a little bit puffier and higher than the rest of the hat. So I'm just going to put that down and let it dry while we move on to other parts of the Santa. So I'm using a 15-second royal icing, and I'm just going to outline and flood in his face. I'm going to just flood right over the top of his eyes, nose, and mustache here because we'll be putting those in later, and we want those to have some height and be a little bit higher than the rest of the cookie. And as I was flooding, I decided I didn't want to go over the top of where his mouth would be, so I'm just going to wipe this little line away with my paintbrush. And then I'll use my scribe to settle this icing down. And we'll give his face a chance to dry, and we'll go ahead and move back up to his hat. And I'm just going to put another line here separating the fold area, and I'm going to go over that twice to give it some height, and then we'll outline and flood in the rest of the hat. So you want to touch down with your icing and then just slightly lift up your icing bag as you follow it around. You want to watch where your line of icing is falling and not the piping bag as it's going around, and that will help you get your icing exactly where you want it. And then just go ahead and flood that in, being careful when you get up to that line where the fold is, and we'll just gently push our icing over there with our scribe because we don't want to cover that up, but we do want to cover up that line of icing we put down for the fold of the hat earlier because we want that area to be extra thick and puffy. So now that I've flooded my cookie, I'm just going to take my scribe and gently move the icing around, pop any air bubbles, and I'm just going to gently push it up against this line here where the fold is because I don't want to cover that line up. I want it to still show, but I do need to get my icing up to the edge there. And then I'll carefully smooth out the icing over that line that we piped earlier so that I don't dent the icing underneath that is still drying, and I just want that part to be extra puffy. And then I decided that I wanted my cheeks to be extra puffy too, so I'm going to stick my bag of icing right down into the wet icing, and I'm just going to pipe a big dot right into the already wet icing. And this will create dimension in Santa's face and give him some big puffy cheeks. I'll just tap up and down gently with my scribe to smooth that icing out and settle it down. You need to be careful when doing this technique if your icing has already crusted over. It will cause your other icing to crack. So there's a fine time to do it between when your icing is just flooded and when it's just starting to crust over. So we'll let that dry, and in the meantime, I'm just going to put a little dot of icing where his mouth would be and paint that in because I want it to have some dimension here too and have his mouth be back behind his face and his beard. So I actually let this cookie dry for a while. It's been drying for about 15 minutes, and now I'm just going to come back in and outline and flood in his beard. And I let it dry just until the icing on the face had crusted over because I want to keep some separation between the beard and the face area. I don't want those icings to blend together and become one, and that is the reason for letting it dry. You don't need to let it dry very long, just long enough for the icing to start to crust over. And then as I always do, I'm going to take my scribe and shape the icing, get it out to the edge, pop any air bubbles, and just smooth out the icing. And I did have some icing that was overflowing the edge of the cookie a little bit, so I just wiped that away with my scribe as well. And now I'm going to go ahead and flood in the disco ball. I'm just going to do that in white, and then I'll paint it later. But for right now, I'm just going to flood in a big ball here in white, and then we'll set this cookie aside to dry again for at least another 15 minutes until the white icing has had a chance to crust over. And how long it takes for your icing to crust over might be different based on where you live. Some areas have more humidity. I don't live in a very high humidity area, so my icing crusts over pretty fast. And now that it has crusted over, I'm going to come back in with my light green icing and flood in the brim of the hat. I'm not going to go quite all the way to the edge on the sides because my icing's a little bit thin, and I'll just use my scribe to push the icing out to the edge. And I also want to make sure that this icing gets all the way down to the cookies so that I don't get a crater. And because this is a Groovy Santa, I decided I wanted to make little flowers in the brim, so I'm just going to take my pink icing and make 5 dots in a circle all the way around his hat brim, and then I'm going to come back in with my scribe and drag each one of those dots towards the center and make little pink groovy flowers on his hat brim. This is a wet on wet effect, and once it dries, it'll just be one solid surface. So now that I'm done making all the dots, I'm just going to take my scribe and drag each drop into the center so it makes more of a teardrop shape. And I'm going to wipe off my scribe after every time I drag a dot into the center so that I don't spread the green icing into the pink petals. And I'm just going to do this for every single one of the dots, and then I might use my scribe to poke up and down gently in the center of each one to settle that icing down. And then I'm going to come back in with my white icing and make little dots in the center of each flower. And then while we let that dry, let's go ahead and pipe in his mustache. So I'm going to give him kind of a long droopy mustache. I don't know if that's the right term for it, so gentlemen, I apologize. I'm just going to outline and flood in a mustache on this side, and then I'll add in the other side. I'm going to try not to cover up his mouth completely, although I did kind of go over the top of it. And then I'll use my scribe to shape the mustache and settle it down just a bit further. And then I let that dry for about 15 minutes, and now I'm going to come back in and give him a nice big pink nose, using my scribe to further shape the icing and settle it down and make sure there's no air bubbles. While we wait for that to dry, we can move back up here to the disco ball and pipe in the lines for the disco ball. So you just want to touch down and then lift up your icing so it's at least 1/8 of an inch away and pull it to the other side. That will help you make straight lines. And then continue making all the lines until your disco ball is complete. If you have little bumps at the start and stop points, you can use a dampened paintbrush or your scribe to knock those down. And you can even use your paintbrush to kind of separate the lines a little bit. And just continue on until all of your lines have been piped for your disco ball, and then we'll let that dry. Once it's dried, we will come back in and paint it a nice metallic pink. And while that's drying, I want to go ahead and make his glasses. So I'm going to put sunglasses on this Disco Santa. So I'm just making dots of royal icing in black on a sheet protector, and I'm just going to take little squares of parchment paper and put them over the top of all of these little dots to flatten them out, and I'm going to let them dry that way. Once they've dried completely, I can peel the parchment paper off, and then we can use them as the lenses for our Disco Santa. I made them in different colors because I wasn't sure what color glasses I wanted to give him. And this is a great way to experiment and see what you want to do. And because I completely covered up his mouth, I'm just going to draw one in here as well. And by the way, my cookie is dried completely. It's been drying for at least 24 hours before I used an edible marker on his mouth. So to attach the glasses to his face, I'm just going to put a dot of royal icing down and then just put my little black dot right into that royal icing and press it down. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. And then we'll use an edible marker to draw in the rest of the glasses. And then all that will be left is to paint our disco ball. I want to kind of give it a metallic rose gold look, so I'm going to add some gold luster dust, some silver metallic paint, and then some pink gel color, and I'm going to mix it around with my scribe until I have a brilliant rose gold or magenta gold color to paint his disco ball with. And I wanted to thin the paint down a little bit, so I'm just going to use a little bit of color solution. You could also use a vodka or a clear extract to do the same thing. And now that my paint is ready, I'm just going to paint over the top of this disco ball. And if you get any paint where you don't want it, you can just take a dampened paintbrush and wash it away. And since I have the paints out, I decided I would go ahead and add some shading and some dimension to the hat. So I'm just going to highlight the crease here with some just plain pink gel color that's been diluted with the color solution, and then kind of feather that out with a flat, dry brush. And I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way around the hat wherever I think it needs some shading or just some extra depth. And I do this in place of airbrushing. I don't have an airbrush machine. I don't want an airbrush machine. And this adds the same dimension and shading around the edges as an airbrush machine would. So again, I just paint on a thin layer and then use a dry brush to feather that out and kind of blend it out into the rest of the area. And now that the paint has set up and dried a little bit on the disco ball, I'm just going to put a couple of dots here in the green and then kind of drag it out into points on the four sides so it looks kind of like a little star on the disco ball or a highlight. And that's it. Our Groovy Santa is done. I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. I will leave a link in the description with all the products I used, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can see all of the other Santas I made with the same cutter. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. See you next time.